Okay, this has been a very rich day. We have amazing, distinguished featured speaker, and then I, Marc Ventresca, will also offer a few brief remarks. So truly, we are standing or sitting between you and the rest of your life. So I'm on the faculty here. My name is Marc Ventresca. I'm an innovation and strategy faculty member. I work with Atif and some of the other colleagues. I'm very happy to be here. I'm really delighted to introduce James Clarke, who's going to be our keynote. James is an alum from Oxford, from the Major Programs Management Group, as well as an alum from Harvard and BYU. He has an interesting career of over 18, 20 years at this point, starting out as an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, doing a wide range of things. In the last couple of years, he's founded something called Clarke Capital Partners, which is a very interesting group that we're going to hear more about today, that really takes seriously the idea that this is a group of experienced executives who come together as operators before they come together as investors, and they offer a very distinctive view on growth. They believe, and he'll tell you more about this, but they believe in really working with firms when they reach kind of an early mid-market stage and growing them dramatically. So he's got a wide range of experiences across industries. He's also a very distinguished philanthropist. He and his wife are very generous supporters of a number of educational arts institutions. They have an active life across many boards and other initiatives. He's also one of the Clarke Capital Partners is also one of the platinum sponsors for this event. So we have James to thank also for much of the value of today, in addition to the other speakers and commentators. So over to you, James, for emerging remarks.
Thank you. Far too kind. Thank you so much. We are just honored to be here today. First, I'm just really sorry. I heard there was this great rugby match going on right now between Scotland and England. So if you haven't already, please feel free to step out if you'd like to. Knowing that I'm the only person stopping you from a nice pint outside the door and a good meal, I'm really starting to question the conventional wisdom of this group. So again, feel free to step out of the room. But those of you that stay, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful to be here today at Oxford. Just reminded to thank, again, Marc and all of those who have put this on. Atif, you've done wonderfully. We are honored to be a part of this, and what a great tradition. You truly are building something great. If this is the capstone to your own major program, this is something wonderful. So thank you very much. I'm reminded just as I stand before you, and also have to thank Dean Peter Trofano for having us here at the business school. We're grateful, but you certainly must already know the joke that originated at his former university. We can talk like that. I think he's left the room now. But it is, how do you know someone went to Harvard? Do you know? They'll tell you. Slightly more elegant, upscale version of that applies to Oxford. How do you know someone went to Oxford? Well, their butler will tell you. Yeah, the question remains for all of us here in major programs. How do you know someone is a major program manager? Anyone know? Well, they're far too busy to tell you anything. So here we are. We program managers, grateful to be here. And when I was asked to speak today, there was only one appropriate response, which was my own loud laughter, because I certainly am the least among you relative to major programs. However, we have applied the methodologies that we've learned here at Oxford and in the course of our relationships in business to what we do in investing. And it's been very, very helpful as we, for the last 7 years, have been planting and planting and planting. And for about the last 14 months, it's been our harvest season. It's been a good harvest season. We look very much forward to redeploying. So to you who are here, good ladies and gentlemen, and those who are still not exiting for the rugby match, thanks for being here. And we acknowledge you for being here and talking about our major programs and mastering scaling. The NPM 2018 conference has discussed, of course, multiple intersections of technology and what major programs, and today we would offer up the imperatives relative to major programs, of the what and the how behind them. But I wish to discuss today principally who is involved with these major programs. And Dr. Nathan Furr, who penned the phrase in his book of the same title, Nailing It and Scaling It, referring to the likes of famous industrialists like Dale Carnegie of steel and Cornelius Vanderbilt, of course, of shipping, then scaled their operations to the fullest. The nail it, then scale it method is based on pattern recognition of the timeless principles and key practices used by successful entrepreneurs to repeatedly innovate and to grow. Oh, were it so simple for all of us. If we could go away for a day and learn these things, immediately go back to our respective firms and practice them. Were it so simple. But it is not. The building up of major programs, like the building of major companies of any organization size or scale, is a result of the efforts elemental to the most effective operators and perhaps the most exciting growth that we know of, known as nailing, then scaling. Common in the creation of the latest tech unicorns that you've all heard of, which is to say gaining triumph through skill or perhaps even luck in a few things, then ramping up one's business as the genesis of success begetting success. More practically, as an entrepreneur and private equity investor, I look forward to building businesses as major programs, yet each very bespoke, as has been discussed today. But instead of bracketed budgets in the billions, to allocate to scale and plan around, the goal is to do more with less. In this sense, my firm's investment is aligned, where not-for-profit governments want lower costs, and yet contractors for profit want the highest cost that perhaps they could get away with. There is an organic misalignment at times betwixt the two. But none of today's most innovative companies started with billions in their budget. They nailed it, then of course they scaled it, and then they raised assets to match, then they delivered. But those that did not became dinosaurs and are now extinct. Of course, we're not talking about them. As an operator, I would argue that the most challenging time in any business is from idea, just the ideation of what you are about to do, and taking that business to $1 million or pounds of earnings is the most challenging time in any business, having done that. After that, you've got opportunity to scale. You've got resources. You might even have some departments, and you certainly have personnel that you could lean on as a resource as you build a brand and ramp towards a $1 billion or even deca-billion-dollar company or business. But scaling is leadership, and leadership without which there is not a Boeing to dream up a 787 Dreamliner, and perhaps no Musk to attempt making private aviation to space, or electric solar power, or even an electrically powered automated car a reality. Leadership and success in major programs is, I would submit, primarily about who. It's about people. Despite calling ourselves engineering or technology or even aviation or infrastructure enterprises here in this room, we are all very much in the people business. It is perhaps the reason for which I've chosen my present profession. I'm betting far more on horses than actually the race. I bet on A-teams and who even sometimes have B ideas. You see, prior to my path at Oxford researching major program management and mega projects, I had come, of course, as Marc had mentioned, from my own entrepreneurial background. A much more modest version of some of the other businesses represented today here at our conference. Of course, think back to those of you who are here from Bechtel, Peabody, Kansas, if that city or town rings a bell, 120 years ago when great-great-grandpa Bechtel was starting out. Those are our roots for most of us here in this room. Or the same might be said about Mr. Gerard Price, Waterhouse, or Mr. Cooper, or Librand, and the like, that started out their nascent businesses. They nailed it, then have scaled it. But I assure you, each of these companies, now leaders of the world's most complex major programs, all share that same humble beginning. My remarks are framed around the fundamental belief that just as ideas are perhaps a dime a dozen, as I see many, many each day, pitched to us formally within our office and others that might come across our desk, the success, or those that are qualified leaders who are intelligent, full of enthusiasm, expertise, grit, gumption, and passion, are not a dime a dozen. My remarks are framed by this thesis, that there are many qualified leaders that are intelligent and many who have not yet been tapped. If all ideas depend upon one on-time and on-time budget execution for success, to what might the success or failure of major programs owe their fate? It then must be the type of execution by people, the who, where major programs intersect in talent to either succeed greatly or to fail miserably. Take, for instance, my research sample of executives. I interviewed 16 executives from a variety of industries, the Sweet 16 that I called them. While a small sample of executives, collectively they had created or led companies in size from a minimum of at least $1 billion all the way up to $156 billion of enterprise value. The combined enterprise value of these 16 was a staggering $471 billion amongst 16 people. Nearly $500 billion created through the efforts of these 16 people by either innovating and founding a company or managing from the C-suite as a CEO. But I had also had another name for them. I called them, apart from the Sweet 16, I called them firstlings, as I had alluded to before. Bear with me as I describe what a firstling actually is and what makes a firstling so special. Much as Gladwell penned the term outlier, or as Taleb gave us a new definition for a black swan, firstlings are defined as inventors entirely of first-of-a-kind products or services. Then they grow their idea into a company or an industry worth well over at least $1 billion. They're more than just tinkerers in a workshop or just simple inventors. They develop the leadership and wherewithal to build that organization to $1 billion of scale. While it might sound as though I'm describing an alien race as a firstling, I'm not. This cast of firstlings and their characteristics, which have made them famous, along with their ideas, are very familiar to us, all of us here in this room. Certainly, we all know inventors, your neighbor, a friend, that brother-in-law. You know which one I'm talking about. Henry Edward Roberts was a man who developed and invented the Altair 8800 computer. Raise your hands if you've heard of him. Like I thought, haven't seen one. This is the man who deserves credit for the invention of the personal computer. Yet, without a mouse, without a screen, without a keyboard, none of us in this room would know of him. The same might be said of a man named Philo T. Farnsworth that I only know because he's from my home state in Idaho. This is the man who developed what would be known as the television set. But he didn't have that gumption or that skill set to build a billion-dollar business behind it. So too, they remain as inventors, known or unknown. The honor of bringing personal computing to the masses or to bring television sets or even mass media belongs to many others. Famous, of course, as we talk about the Wright brothers, and we've talked about them many times throughout the course of events today, they are acknowledged as the fathers of flight. They are famous. We know of them. But they certainly didn't found companies like Boeing or Fokker or Dassault or even an airline to follow. They are, again, simply inventors, albeit very famous ones. On the other hand, a Thomas Edison, as we talk about firstlings, would be perhaps described as the ultimate firstling. Why? Because in the 19th century, he, of course, invented the light bulb, the very symbol behind ideation. When the light comes on, or even lighting of bright ideas themselves, is the sign of innovation. Yet many ideas were not the end of his talents, but the organization of an enterprise, and this business that, of course, became GE. And as of 2000, of course, had an enterprise value of about $500 billion. No longer the case today. But an example of a modern-day firstling would be a man named Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook. What is Facebook? Most of us asked ourselves about 10 years ago as we saw it on the screen. Of course, this is a first-of-a-kind invention whose founder then took that from ideation, simple idea, thought process, to the thing, the product or service, and developed it, taking it to market, and remains the CEO of a company that also has a market cap of over $500 billion. Perhaps more famous and slightly more common yet are afterlings beyond their firstling counterparts. We've heard a bunch about Steve Jobs today, but never about Wozniak, never about the inventor, the brilliant and the bold and the cutting-edge Jobs did not invent the personal computer. We already talked about who had done that. The lesser known of this partnership, Wozniak, his programmer and developer, was perhaps the true developer who did this in personal computing, credited now, as we know, to Henry Edward Roberts. Wozniak and Jobs innovated, popularized, and profited. Good for them. Additional afterlings in Apple's industry may be considered as Android, Xiaomi, Huawei, and as Atif says, all of these are just iPhones, right? All basically the same. All examples of multi-billion-dollar programs or companies leveraging the success of their predecessors and scaling through capital, technology, and processes. So why are firstlings or afterlings or any lings important to major programs or major program management or scaling or any of us sitting here in this room today? Well, quite simply, I would propose and submit to you that firstlings are an extremely rare breed. The rarest, in fact. Well, not as rare as firstlings, afterlings, and their core skill sets or even DNA may directly translate into those attributes essentially or giving them success to navigation as a major program manager. Ideas that were once just thoughts by inventors are transformed into life-changing and even world-changing products, programs, or businesses through discovering or development of skills with oneself or fostered by leadership within an organization to scale up enterprises around a once unheard of idea. Not too dissimilar from the idea of the damming of the Three Gorges for regional or agricultural stability and power, most ideas start with, what if? The same is true as, with an underwater tunnel, or now we know the Channel, bridging between France and England. Or as Jan discussed earlier, even putting a man on the moon. All just ideas, a dime a dozen, as we've discussed, until married with the right who. Firstlings, secondlings, anylings, the best of the best major program managers, making what was previously impossible possible. Might I suggest a handful of common traits to which many of these firstlings and afterlings owe their success? The engineers in the room may be thinking, this is all fluff. Yet this softer yet identifiable aspect of major programs is perhaps the mightiest catalyst of success or failure, the people behind it. They are barrier breakers first. Physiological, physical, and psychological barriers. And in 1954, the world of sport and even science focused on the breaking of the 4-minute mile barrier, considered amongst the world's greatest to be impossible. Top runner John Landy stated 2 seconds from his previous time may not sound like much, but to me it is like trying to break through a brick wall. Someone may achieve the sub 4-minute mile in the world is wanting. The world is so wanting desperately, but I don't think I can. So that was to become Landy's legacy. That quote, that I don't think I can. Shortly after Landy's statement, Oxford's own Roger Bannister, my former headmaster, on May 6, 1954, crafted and delivered a performance that stopped the clock at 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds. Now proven possible, of course, John Landy, who had once said, I don't think I can, went out and ran not just the sub 4-minute mile, not just the 3.59 second minute mile, but 3 minutes, 57.9 seconds, one-upping Mr. Bannister. 4 seconds faster than he'd ever dreamt of or managed his own sub 4-minute mile, and proof that the 4-minute mile was most definitely not beyond his capabilities. Bannister had broken down Landy's and all runners' wall. Having removed a mental barrier from Landy's mind, his physiological and psychological abilities to express themselves and produce the time that his body would allow. With a mental barrier removed, belief drives performance. If a firstling project has been accomplished by someone else, the barrier is thusly broken, opening doors and removing obstacles for the afterlings to follow. As Atif said, they're just all iPhones. And also of note, Landy went on to record to a record race, freed of the pressure. He didn't have that pressure any longer. When it has, a barrier has been broken, we can also follow. The success of major programs, overcoming barriers, psychological and physical, allows to prove the impossible to be possible. While a company effort, in our cases, this is leadership and driven by the who behind it. Watch for more than intellectual intelligence or sound or the sounding good within your organizations. Emotional intelligence is being good. It is following, it is following a methodology now made famous by Degas, now proven possible through his research that amidst his sample of more than 200 within his own organization, that there is something that we know now as emotional intelligence. But what does emotional intelligence mean to us? Amidst my own sample of 16 were included a former NFL football player, one of the true greats. He was an NFL MVP, but I guess not achieving as much as he had thought that he might. He went on to found a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm as well. Whether he loved to win or hate to lose was the question I asked him. Steve, do you love to win or hate to lose? Sounding magnanimous, he responded to me, James, I love to win. But 20 minutes later into the questioning, he then responded to me and said, James, I just have to stop you. I just hate to lose. Hating to lose, turns out, is a very, very powerful concept that has driven many of the major program managers that I am aware of. Whether that is failure to believe that you can succeed, or failures, or believing that you can't, or as I did when I started a company, I didn't believe that I could fail. He was in that spot where he believed that he must win. Therefore, hating a failure was a very, very powerful concept to him. So, to our firstlings, to the who, to the pillars of major program management, I give pause, and I have, and wish to release you to that pub on the other side of this door, and to a rugby match, and acknowledge to you here at the epicenter of all things major program management, in this near movement of sorts, with a battle cry of on time and on budget. Thank you to the who in this room, to all of you who have traveled here today, and for your attendance and your belief and your efforts in this leadership, fostering future firstlings of major programs here at Oxford and around the globe. Thank you and good evening.
Atif? Does that mean to say something or want me to end?
10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, great. We're running out of time. So, James, thank you very much for a really kind of moving and personal account. I think that I want to take a couple minutes to sort of thread through the day. I want to start with what James said. I want to work back up into a set of ideas. If you guys want to put up the slides, that'd be great. I'm not going to use them all, but if you put up the slides, that'd be super. So I think James gave something really important. His own experience is that it's someone who does something distinctive and new. It's a core notion of what entrepreneurs do. It's a core notion of innovation, focused on the power and the determination and the experience of the individual. I think that's very powerful and really opens up for us this idea of first links, after links, and then the wider community that matters. I think he also said something really important that I want to share with you. Atif asked me to think a little bit about the day in terms of my own work as someone who studies innovation and thinks about how innovation happens in large-scale systems. And so I think the lead that James gave us is people like Steve Jobs, in fact, and people like Mark Zuckerberg get a lot of credit for a lot of things, as they should, but actually they work in already existing systems. They rebuild those systems, they innovate in them, they recreate them, they pull together systems that weren't connected originally. And I think that's a way to link what James said with what I want to say about the power of major programs and also the challenge of major programs. I'm going to just talk through for about 5 minutes, and then we'll stop if you have questions for James, or we'll just conclude at that point. But the slide up here kind of lays out a series of conversations I'd like you to reflect on as you leave today. We started the day with Atif and others giving us a very powerful sense of the construction industries, major program industries in general, and major programs are challenged in many ways that are systematic and that we understand well. And Atif gave us a really powerful vision that what we really need is a kind of a master scaling model. And I think he worked through a set of ideas that are familiar to everyone in this room. The challenge is in implementation, right? The ideas, though, are we need to begin to rationalize and standardize. We need to modularize. We need to digitize. We need to take into account the benefits of 100 years of intensification of information. I think Atif and others have referred to a series of industrial revolutions, originally steam, which pushed animate labor out in favor of inanimate labor, then kind of mass production in the 19th century, and then really this information intensification over the long 20th century. So I think that's a powerful idea. I want to celebrate that, but I also want to think a little bit with you about the limits of that model. Scale in that sense is dramatically important, and I think everyone in the room really resonated to the power of being able to implement that. Can I trouble you to just go to my next slide, or can I go to my next slide? We'll see if yeah. So, this was the slide I was saying. This is, I think, Atif really helped us thinking about, across a number of industries and across the plurality of disciplines and expertise that comes together to make major programs work. They are all in some version of needing to dramatically embrace the 20th century, if I can say it in those terms. And I think it's a powerful insight. What I want to push on, though, to think about is it brings us back to the idea of the edge of technology. One of the core commentators on modern innovation is a guy named Joseph Schumpeter, an Austrian economist, who said, we may have misplaced our faith in technology to always make that precede the word innovation. And Schumpeter, a long time ago, said what all the panelists said today. Technology is a starting point, it's not the ending point. Even these very promising technologies that we're excited about today, blockchain, AI, the range of new kinds of methodologies, BIM, all the kinds of worlds that help us accomplish what Atif said we need to do. I want to remind you, Schumpeter said we need to really pay attention, though, to new forms of governance, to wider supply chains, and really, in the spirit of what James just said, to the edges of existing systems. Who are going to be the boundary spanners? Who are going to walk across those incumbent systems and forge and find new kinds of combinations that allow the sort of dramatic efficiencies that Atif and others have asked us to think about? So I want to ask you to think a little bit about innovation in that sense. It is a new idea, but it's also the people who begin to connect and forge interfaces at the boundaries of existing work. I also want to ask you to think for a minute or two about this question, which is, at some point we come to the end of, I can't make this go forward, at some point we come to the end of that question. A lot of economists today, really in the spirit of Robert North, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, said there are two kinds of efficiency we might want to worry about. Productive efficiencies are what we have talked about a lot today. How do you get more output from less input? How do you begin to change the equation of inputs through some process to outputs? North called that productive efficiencies, and those are at the heart of making money. They're at the heart of doing what we do already better, more efficiently, more effectively. But North and a whole number of historical economists, institutionalists, and others have said there's also adaptive efficiency. And they say adaptive efficiency is different than how most of us think about productive efficiency. They say adaptive efficiency is really the ability of economies and institutions to change over time to respond to successive new situations, in part by developing and adapting and adopting technological innovations and enabling capacity. And that's the thought I want to leave you with today. I think we're in an era when we need to exactly follow the wisdom of all the panelists that we heard today. We need new kinds of productive efficiencies, and that will come from engaging with new technologies. We also, though, need to begin to dramatically think as a community of leaders, a community of corporates, a community of policymakers, and a community of investors. We need to imagine adaptive efficiencies, which really turn on going beyond what we know how to do today, beyond how we organize today, beyond the skill sets and knowledge and disciplines that we use today to realize that remarkable set of 10x or 20x or 50x that many people talk about that are possible. That language, as you know, of 10x or 20x or 100x comes out of some of the core technology centers today. But those very same places are realizing to achieve 10x or 20x or 100x takes more than simply technological innovation. It takes innovation in whole communities of activity, in the broader partnerships that go across conventional industry boundaries. I'm not going to go through the other slides I have, but just to wrap up by saying, I think that the challenge is exactly as our panelists have laid out today, and the power that James related to us of people who have that imagination and take those first steps. I think we as a community also have to begin to imagine what are the adaptive institutions, what are the new forms of governance? In the idiom of Elinor Ostrom, another Nobel Prize winner, she helped us understand that face-to-face communities that straddle those boundaries are actually the basis for governing what she called the commons, that is scarce, non-renewable resources. So the commons may be a metaphor we want to think about in major program management. What are the commons? What are the shared, fateful interdependencies that we need to manage better to begin to realize those 10 and 20 and 100 times efficiencies? So I'm asking here to begin to celebrate the calls for all of the digital technologies and all of the insights that we understand very well today, but to add to that a firm commitment to new forms of political and institutional organization, to add to that new forms of democracy and governance, to add to that new kinds of skills that we as a community, whether in firms or in wider industries or in newer value constellations that may look nothing like an industry looks today, that I think is the way we want to go. So I feel like today was an incredibly fruitful day. I think we've challenged your energy and your patience, and we've challenged you to think about things that are familiar and some things not familiar. I think we owe great gratitude to several keynotes, including James and also to Atif and other colleagues. I want to encourage you to have a great evening and really begin to think about this tension between productive efficiencies and all the ways we know to make those happen, but also adaptive efficiencies that involve purposeful restructuring of the institutions that shape and guide economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, a big thank you to James Clarke and Professor Marc Ventresca for their remarks. Thank you. I think the earlier part of the day, when we're discussing technology, we presented a somewhat hard-edged view of technology. But as we began to wrap up, it turns out that technology needs to have much greater compassion. Otherwise, it could do more harm than good. And both James and Marc have very eloquently outlined the case for compassion in technology. I think it's a message for us to take with us as we think about sharpening our businesses, but also creating societal change. I want to offer a number of thank yous today. So please bear with me, as the list is long. A conference does not produce itself. It takes a huge amount of effort. So first of all, allow me to thank our sponsors, Bechtel, but also Clarke Capital Partners, Oracle, PwC, and Jacobs for the tremendous support. I'd also like to thank Arcadis, Berkeley Research Group, Endeavour Programme, the Nanfung Group, Civita, and the Region H Hospital in Denmark. So please, big round of applause for all of our sponsors. I'm profoundly grateful to Dean Peter Tufano, as well as senior management at the Saïd Business School, to allow us to put on this show and support the somewhat esoteric field of research. There are not many elite universities that consider project management as an area worthy of research. Oxford's been committed to this area for over 10 years and has allowed us to grow and flourish. So I'd like to thank for all the support from faculty as well as management in allowing us to do that. So thank you. A massive thank you to all of you here, because none of this would work if we were speaking to an empty room. And I am absolutely touched to see so many MSc in Major Program Management, as well as MPLA alumni back in the room here, but also faces not familiar to us before. And we love the fact that you are following us on social media, appreciating our work, encouraging us, and ultimately engaging with us. So a big round of applause to you for participating. A huge thank you to the conference producers, Chris Page, Tiffany Franklin, Cody Sterling, Cameron Bell, Jose Silva. You've been amazing in pulling this all together. A huge thank you. Moreover, the SBS conference staff, as well as various teams, have worked tirelessly to make this happen. So please bear with me as I take their names, because you only get to see me, but they're the ones who did all the work. So Sarah Hayton, Zoe Hart, Amy Russell, the registration teams, catering, press, the Q&A runners, the tech teams, and the student volunteers. A huge thank you for making all of this happen for us. I feel like we've had a great day, and I feel like you guys are going to come back for more. So next year, 15th and 16th of February, we're going to do a conference on major programs in emerging markets. Are they particles of development or hangman's knots? So please do come back. I have one plea. We really struggle, despite tremendous effort, to enlist women leaders to come speak. And we spent a huge amount of time trying to get them to accept invitations, but we just couldn't. So as a result, you saw a tremendous concentration of men, and they had great ideas, but we'd like to see yet more diversity. So if yourself or anybody you know who is a leader in this space and would like to speak, please put us in touch with her, and we'd love to invite them as well. So, this message goes out to her. Daniela, you are in charge. Thank you. We'll now break for drinks in the main foyer. David Teese from Berkeley Research Group has very kindly provided wine from his vineyards in New Zealand, and at the reception at Keble College. Dinner, for those who book tickets, begins at 7 p.m. At Keble. It's a relatively short walk. If you don't know your way, we shall be happy to direct you. And we'll have David Norwood from Oxford Science Innovation, as well as Dr. Berchin as keynote speakers. Thank you very much.